Hey guys, I received my Dan case A4 a few months ago and quickly enough I swapped all the parts out of my previous case in that new one. I simply had to get myself an SFX power supply, but all my other parts were the right size for the Dan case. But I knew I wanted to update my build. By the way, I invite you to check out that video first, as this one will start exactly where we left off. Having a 4th gen i7 and a matching Z97 motherboard, that thing was starting to get old a bit. I also wanted to get on the M.2 SSD train, both for the speed upgrades and to minimize the number of cables in my case. This small case doesn't have a lot of airflow, so less cables is always a good thing. Unfortunately, my board didn't have any M.2 slots because of its age, and the RAM I had was DDR3. So I had to replace pretty much every part in my system except for the case, the power supply, which I had just replaced, and my GTX 1070, which still does the job fine. So here are the parts I went with. The motherboard I chose is the Gigabyte H370M, a mini ITX board with plenty of features. I also have the Asus variant in my build at work, that's the H370i, and it has the same chipset and both are mini ITX, and they share a lot of similar features. Oh, and let me know down below if you'd like me to make a video comparing both of these boards against each other. As for the Gigabyte board, it has two M.2 slots, which is mostly why I went with it. As for IOs, it's a bit limited, but you get two LAN ports, built-in Wi-Fi, and multiple video outputs that I won't use as I have a dedicated GPU. The PCI Express slot is reinforced and you get 3 fan headers, which is great for a mini ITX board. As for my CPU choice, I went with the i5-8600. I had a 4-core 8-thread i7 before and it was running at its 4 GHz stock speed, so going with a 3.1 GHz 6-core 6-thread CPU might seem like a downgrade, but I mostly use my computer for web browsing, some gaming from time to time, and remote work as a full-stack web developer. So I'm losing 2 virtual cores, but I'm gaining 2 real cores. I can't really tell the difference between both for what I do honestly. I think that I'm not really maxing out either of them with my usage. This also has a 65 watt TDP instead of 95, so it should dissipate less heat than my i7, and that's a good thing considering the size of my case. As for the RAM, I went with Trident Z RGB sticks from G.Skill, specifically 2 sticks of 8 gigs at 2666 MHz. The price was good when I ordered, and as I have a non-case CPU, there's no point of getting higher clock memory as the limit will be 2666 anyway. Quite a popular option nowadays. I picked these as their illumination looks nice and they were compatible with Gigabyte's RGB Fusion software. As for storage, I went with two 250GB M.2 SSDs from Samsung. As I ordered these 960 EVOs, Samsung announced the 970 line. I was a bit disappointed, but I paid much lower than what the 970s would have cost, and the speed difference, while being considerable, will probably not make a huge difference in real-world scenarios. So the goal here was to run these in a RAID 0 config so that they're even faster than their advertised speed alone. I did the same thing with Intel 760p SSDs in my work PC build, and I invite you to check it out if you haven't already, as it's quite a beautiful PC that I've built. Back to the parts, I also picked up a Noctua LH9i cooler for my new CPU. I had a CryoRig C7 before, which was enough for my needs, but the fan was loud, so this cooler seemed like a nice upgrade in terms of sound. And they're almost the same price here in Canada, so I think the Noctua is a great option. And the finish looks super nice too. It comes with extra screws, a low RPM adapter, and thermal paste, so you get everything you need. So that's all for the parts I will add to my build. Now let's not waste any more time and update my build with these. So first thing I did was to install the RAM sticks. There's only 2 slots and I have 2 sticks, so it's quite simple. Then I started installing the SSDs, so one at the front securing it down with a screw and doing the same thing at the back. Both of these drives won't have heat sinks, and I expect the one at the back to get quite hot during bulk operations, so we'll have to see how that goes in real life scenarios. After that, I popped in the CPU, again quite simple by leaving the protector in place until it pops out. So here's a look at what we had until now. In the following, I will install the Noctua cooler and then I'll proceed to the hardware swap in my case. I added a bit of thermal paste on my CPU, maybe a bit too much I'd say, but then I installed the actual cooler using the included nuts and screwing them under the board. But then I installed the actual cooler using the included nuts and screwed them under the motherboard. Really simple to install, no backplates or weird adapters. And the final touch, I connected the fans cable to my motherboard. So it was time to install the new parts in my case, but I had to remove the older ones first. So I unplugged all my previous motherboard's cables, so I had PSU, fan setup, PCI, and front panel cables. Then I removed the screws that kept it in place and I was able to remove it entirely alongside the I/O shield. Then I removed the panel that wraps the top and front of the case. The goal here was to remove my previous SATA SSD as I wouldn't need it anymore with my M.2s. Unfortunately, some of the screws were only accessible with the GPU removed, so I had to remove it temporarily to do so. Then I could remove two of the screws that held the SSD in place, so after that I could reinstall the GPU. So much work for such little progress. Fortunately, I only had one screw left to remove as I didn't install the one behind the PSU in my first build, and I'm glad I didn't as I would have had to remove the PSU as well to get to the last screw. So now I was ready to install the motherboard in and its I/O shield as well. I was then able to secure it in place using the 4 corner screws. After that, I could reconnect the 24-pin motherboard power cable and the 4x4 CPU power cable too. So I plugged in the PC to see if it was powering on, and it was on my first attempt. I know my cable management sucks, but with the hard cables that the Corsair SF600 comes with, it's not that easy to have them looking nice. My next upgrades will definitely be custom PSU cables so that I get ones that are more flexible and just the right length too. And while my Arctic fan at the bottom works well, getting another slim Noctua fan like the one that's on my cooler would give me more space to work with. So I could then reinstall all my case's panels. I started with the top and front panel as the side panels kind of sit on it, and then I could install both side panels with ease. First thing I did when I booted the PC was to configure my two M.2 SSDs in a RAID array using my motherboard's Easy RAID software. That's available from the BIOS menu, which is great and it's super easy to do. Then when I installed Windows, the installer saw my two M.2 drives as a single drive to install the OS on. With my Asus board at work, I needed to load up the Intel RST drivers so that the installer recognizes the RAID array, but I didn't need them this time. And I was pretty much done. Since I filmed that build upgrade, I also added LED strips in my case plugged in my motherboard. It wasn't that easy to get everything working in such a tiny case with third-party LEDs, and I did the same thing with my build at work with my Asus H370i motherboard, so I could also compare how both motherboards lets you use LED strip and how their software work. So let me know down in the comments if you'd like me to make a video about that in the next weeks. Overall, I'm really pleased with this build. It looks great and I can sync all my LEDs together apart from the ones on my EVGA card. Also, this Noctua cooler is a lot quieter than my previous CryoRig C7, so that's a nice upgrade there too. As I said earlier, my next upgrades would be custom PSU cables for better airflow and to help with cable management. Maybe a thinner fan too, and I could switch my 1070 to another one that only uses a single 8-pin connector. The one I have is the For the Win by EVGA, and they added two 8-pins connector, which doesn't really help with overclocking anyway, so going with one with a single 8-pin connector would reduce the number of cables in my build. I'm still pleased with the DAN case, and custom tempered glass panels are something I really like, but I'm a bit worried that the price would be really high. But hey, that's only another project idea in my to-do list. So hope you guys enjoyed this build update. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them down in the comments below. And as always, don't forget to subscribe if you still haven't already, as I'll see you in the next video.